This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former state senator, former chairman of the Board of Education, Howard Lee, syndicated columnist and author, John Hood, NC Policy Watch's Chris Fitzsimon, and former House Speaker, Joe Mavretic. Well, the legislature's adjourned, and as is our tradition, we want to let the dust settle a bit before we ask our panel to give you a full analysis as to what was done and what was left undone in the session. We'll do that next week's show, so be sure to tune in. This week's show promises to be equally interesting as we discuss the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to hear North Carolina's redistricting lawsuits, consider whether our economic incentives need changing or scrapping, and ask to take a look at the growing number and forms of protest. And as always, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. One thing you can count on whenever North Carolina has to redraw congressional and legislative districts is that lawsuits will follow. Even though our state Supreme Court upheld the congressional districts that were drawn, a three-judge federal panel declared them racially biased and required they be redrawn. But the lawsuits didn't end there. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear the case this fall. John, we know there's a 4-4 split among the liberal and conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court. Should we perhaps expect to see a similar outcome from this case?
It's possible. This is the problem that we've had with North Carolina and redistricting issues for decades, which is, there are many problems, but one of them is that the U.S. Supreme Court will not provide a straight answer. They won't provide a straight answer to North Carolina litigants. They won't provide a straight answer to litigants in other states. They seem to, in some cases, have adopted the old obscenity standard. I'll know something bad when I see it. And that's not adequate guidance for state legislators around the country to decide how to apply the Voting Rights Act. I hope that there is some clarity. I doubt there will be. In the past, the Supreme Court has said that race was used too much to draw districts. Then they've said race was used too little to draw districts. Then they've said race is used too much to draw districts. It goes back and forth and back and forth. Remember, the Supreme Court is not being asked to rule and is not going to rule that gerrymandering itself is unconstitutional. They're not going to do that. We ought to get rid of it, but you're not going to do it on the basis of constitutional claims. This is strictly about the application, as I understand it, of the Voting Rights Act and related legislation.
All right, Chris, let's drill down a little bit on this. Play what if. If the court finds these maps don't meet compliance, what could happen here? Could they ask the legislature to draw new maps? Could they get someone to draw them themselves? What could happen?
I think if the maps are thrown out, then the legislature would have to redraw the maps. But I do think we need clarity, and I think they've been a little clearer than John has said. Although I think we need to have a lot more guidance from the Supreme Court. It's clear that the Voting Rights Act requires us to draw districts in certain ways that allow members of a minority to have a legitimate chance to be represented and elect their own representatives. The question, of course, is what is packing that the Republicans have mastered over the years, packing a lot of African Americans in individual districts to increase the number of districts that Republicans win, because most African Americans are Democratic. The question is, where's that threshold? And we're going to have another go at it, and the Supreme Court is going to tell us again, we hope, where that threshold is.
So are there any particular districts that y'all are aware of that might come under scrutiny for this Supreme Court case?
Well, as I understand it, remember, this is the case from the original set of maps.
Right, not the new maps.
Not the new maps.
Right, so this is that they are litigating whether the previous set of maps that are no longer in place used race too much.
What purpose does that serve? They've already been redrawn. We've already had elections on
There may still be precedential benefit. As I said, it would be helpful if the Supreme Court came up with a standard, if they're going to reject. Now, you could also say maybe the Supreme Court should defer to state legislatures to make these decisions and make it a political matter. But if the U.S. Supreme Court is going to intervene, they have to do something other than, well, we'll see. Just send it up here and we'll figure it out, because this is going to continue forever. It used to be people thought, obviously, if you packed African Americans, 80% in a district, 75% in a district, that would be wrong, but around a 50% margin would be reasonable. Now that's apparently packing, and it's really 40%. Is 10 years from now, is it going to be 35%? I mean, this can't be a moving target. It just can't be.
Howard, there's another federal district court case that involves legislative maps, and there's been a lot of speculation that perhaps that court might decide that some of the legislative districts in North Carolina, could we end up in the same situation all over again, having to draw legislative districts? Certainly not until after the 2016 elections.
Well, it's hard to say, but I wouldn't be surprised, because I'm not a great fan of legislative redistricting since I was a victim of legislative redistricting. But I do think we could very well find ourselves having to do the whole kit and caboodle over again. And I was really surprised that the Supreme Court accepted this case. I thought that having been decided by a 3-panel judge that it would probably just go away, but I don't see any different outcome as a result, even if they're looking at a different set of maps. I don't see that there's going to be a turnover of where we are.
Joe, this thing's just not serving any purpose at all. We've already thrown them out.
Howard was affected by redistricting in 81. I was involved and part of redistricting in 71, and I was in 81 and in 91. So I've got real familiarity with the issue. And it has to do with how you're going to use a racial block vote. And that's what it is. In North Carolina, it's a racial block vote. And how you distribute that vote so that, from a Democratic point of view, it has the most influence on the most elections. And that is always going to be contentious. So North Carolina is going to be involved in redistricting based on racial issues in ad infinitum.
But this keeps coming back to the very obvious conclusion that the only way to potentially avoid this at all is to get an independent redistricting commission. What's it going to take to do that?
No, I disagree with that.
Voting Rights Act.
I mean,
they can take into account the Voting Rights Act.
You can create a process like that after you define what the Voting Rights Act requires. The commission is not going to be able to do that. It's still going to be litigated until there is a clear standard about what it requires. It's as simple as that.
So is that the primary responsibility of the court or the Congress?
I think the Congress should rewrite the Voting Rights Act. Absolutely. I think they're not going to, and so we're going to continue to have this rigmarole back and forth to federal courts.
Final thoughts on this subject?
Well, if you have African American votes, and if you distribute them one way, you have 2 outcomes which are pleasant to Republicans, or if you distribute those votes in another way where you have 3 outcomes and that's acceptable to Democrats, this is always going to be the case in North Carolina because of the block vote of significant percentage of the voters in this state.
Interesting.
Never going to go away.
All right. We thank you for watching NC Spin. Don't forget, next week's show will give you a full recap of the recently adjourned legislative session. We also want to give WRAL viewers a heads up that this legislative recap program is going to be aired on WRAL Saturday, July 16th at 7:30 p.m. So be sure to tune in Saturday night instead of Sunday. Our show will air at its regular time slot in all other NC Spin network stations. And you can always watch us online by visiting our website, ncspin.com, where you'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, opinion pieces from our panel, and my weekly column. So get more balanced debate from the Old North State on ncspin.com. After these messages, we'll talk about economic incentives.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina is a great state with great assets.
Among them are 180,000 state employees.
Our legislators are considering important decisions regarding working conditions,
health insurance,
retirement benefits,
and pay for state employees.
Scenic is the one voice at the table when those decisions are being considered.
Scenic is revitalized and refocused.
A stronger Scenic ensures a more effective voice.
Learn more at www.scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
We've talked a great deal about economic incentives given to businesses to locate in our state. Financial analyst Sarah Cheney recently published a report on WREL.com saying that even though privately held, generally smaller companies make up about 65% of all businesses, and an estimated 7 out of every 10 new jobs are created by small businesses, our state's awarded about 85% of all the incentive funding to public companies. Now, many critics saying we're giving incentives to the wrong group, and in fact, Dr. Roy Cardado of the John Locke Foundation says we should scrap the whole program because it creates economic inefficiencies and hinders economic growth. Howard Lee, for most of your life, you've been a small businessman. Should we change to whom and how we award economic incentives, or scrap it altogether?
I don't think we should scrap it because we're in a fight, and you got to pay to play. And I'm watching other states who are certainly attracting large companies, and these companies are attracting smaller companies that come in to service these large companies. And I just think we have to keep moving in the direction. Small businesses can benefit if a big company comes in and then subcontracts to that little company. So you grow a lot of small companies as a result of that. I think we made a terrible mistake when the legislature abandoned the movie industry, because now Georgia, and I just had to hear that this weekend, is taunting itself as being the movie-making capital of the South. And they have a very strong incentive program. So I don't think we should change anything, but I do think we should find ways to make it supportive, to be more supportive of small businesses.
Joe, you remember when we got into this incentive business, it was in the 90s, and the Mercedes-Benz project, which ended up going to Alabama. The whole concept of incentives end up picking winners and losers effectively, especially those elephant projects, or projects that offer lots of jobs. Does our track record with incentives justify what we've done?
No. As a matter of fact, I think the great success story in North Carolina, I want to build on what Howard said. Howard talked about the movie industry. Well, it wasn't this great monolith. It was a whole lot of people making a bunch of movies. The great success story in North Carolina is craft beer. Craft beer has been available in North Carolina for about 10 years. Started off with, I think, 4 breweries in North Carolina. Now we have over 170. We are the leading state in the South for craft breweries. Every one of those craft breweries has to have bottles, has to have advertising, has to have people to deliver the product, has to have people who make the product, have to have all kind of associated industries that go along with it. And it is the success story of the last decade in North Carolina, from the time Mike Easley signed the Pop-to-Cop bill until today. And we're probably going to end up with somewhere around 200 craft breweries in North Carolina. A marvelous local industry.
Mostly small businesses.
It's absolutely small businesses, and that's where it ought to go.
John, we pay a lot of lip service to the benefit of small business in North Carolina, but they receive few of the incentives that are given out. And some people are saying this is because they don't have the profitability to be able to receive the tax incentives, the tax credits that are given out. What could we genuinely do to help small companies?
Well, we should focus on the kinds of things that allowed the craft beer industry and other industries to thrive, which is not throwing little pots of money around. There have been a couple of subsidy deals, as I understand it, but for the most part, that has been deregulatory. Once you allowed this industry to flourish, it flourished. Now, not every company succeeded, some fail. If you want to see something worse than having our current incentive policy skewed towards large companies, try to go in and skew it towards small companies, because when you have small startup companies, you have a lot of risk, even more risk than you have in some big corporate relocations. You'd have a lot of businesses take money, if we converted it into grants or something, or changed the formula, you'd have a lot of small businesses get some money and fail. That would be a waste of money. It would be very unpopular. The answer here is to reduce and eliminate this practice, not try to be more creative and do it with smaller companies.
All right, Chris, let's play what if here. What if we discontinued doling out economic incentives? You've spoken out against them for many years on NC Spend.
I have.
What would happen if we're going to be like Senator Lee talks about? We're going to lose out in the fight?
Well, I mean, we don't know. That's the whole thing. We're always threatened with the fact that, well, we're going to lose everything if we don't do this. But I'd like to change the conversation a little bit to what is an incentive? Is it cash? Or is it a community college system that can train workers? Yeah. Is it roads and environmental protections and other things that people want to quality of life measurements? Is it good schools? I mean,
that doesn't seem to count in the
it counts. I think
it's important, but it
training employees counts, and I think providing them a highway that maybe widen the highway so they can get their goods or get their employees to work. I think my definition of a good incentive is one that stays in the state and improves the state. It just doesn't go to the company and then leave when the company leaves, or doesn't, or it goes to another state and another state and another state.
As a matter of fact, you talk about what counts. If you look at empirical research of what makes state economies successful, access to good infrastructure, high quality workforce, low overall tax rates actually do count. You know what doesn't count? Targeted tax incentives. The evidence on them is very bad. So if we're going to base our policy on what is empirically demonstrated to be valuable, you wouldn't mess with incentives, you would mess with broader policies.
So Howard, do you see any appetite from anybody in any kind of position of authority, the legislature, the governor, the head of economic development, is there any appetite to do anything about these incentive programs? Or are we just going to keep talking about it?
I don't think there's any appetite to change because it's a frightening experience to be recognizing that you need the jobs. And of course, no, I don't see an appetite to change.
All right, you may protest, but after these messages, we're going to talk about protests.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Closed, a sign you're seeing too often, especially on abandoned grocery stores and markets. When these stores close, we all lose. We lose the healthy North Carolina grown fresh produce, and our farmers lose local outlets to sell what they grow. The Healthy Corner Store Initiative can change this by providing resources to local small store owners so they can stock and sell fresh fruits and vegetables. Find out how you can get involved at ncallianceforhealth.org.
You only get one pair of eyes. Keeping them healthy is critical to your quality of life. Members of the NC Optometric Society know this. These highly skilled doctors have the latest technology and the medical training to care for your eyes and the eyes of those you love. Make sure you visit your optometrist for an eye exam on a regular basis. For more information on keeping your eyes healthy or to find the right optometrist for you, visit nceyes.org. Remember, healthy eyes, healthier lives.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today, I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
In this highly divisive and partisan era that we live in, we've seen a resurgence of protest. Here in North Carolina, we've witnessed protests like the moral majority, protests at the UNC Board of Governors meetings, and most recently, teacher protests out in front of our state capitol. Our U.S. Congress recently saw protest over gun control with a filibuster in the Senate and a sit-down demonstration in the well of the Congress. Joe Mavretic, House Speaker Paul Ryan was forced to adjourn the House for the July 4th break in order to end that Democratic-led sit-down demonstration. Now, since our state has followed so many other national trends, do you think it's possible we might see one party or one faction or another conduct similar protests in our state legislature?
I think it's possible because we've already had the mobs outside of the building and the mobs inside the building, but at least not in the hall of the House. I must tell you, Tom, it's a visceral issue with me. When you go to the Congress, now let's talk about the House of Representatives, not the Senate. But when you go to the House of Representatives, you swear that you're going to uphold the rules of the House, which are embedded in the Jefferson Manual. We ought to take those representatives at their word that they are trustworthy and honorable people. When you violate the first rule of the House of Representatives, in that you will obey the rules of the House, then I think you have lost your honor. I think you are despicable. I think you have done something in the hall of the Congress which is totally opposed to mature, reasoned debate.
Wow, strong language.
And I hope that it never happens again in the Congress, and I would hope that no speaker allows it to happen in North Carolina.
Anybody want to respond to this? That's very strong language.
I hear what the speaker is saying. It would be one thing if this was the first time this has happened. It's not the first time. Congress has always been a body that engaged in protest. I remember Adam Clayton Powell and a congressman from Georgia who got in a fist fight right on the floor of the U.S. Congress. Luckily, nobody's bringing guns in these days because they're not duels. I think when people feel that they don't have access to communicate, they use the only tool they have to get attention. And right now, it appears that there is such a divide in Congress that people can't talk to each other, and they don't feel like they're getting consideration.
Well, so what do you do?
And so now they're using this tactic.
What do you do when your voice isn't heard?
I think you don't act like some snot-nosed 19-year-old kid who thinks he or she can occupy the chancellor's office and refuse to leave until your demands are met. That kind of stuff should just never be tolerated. I know that people say, well, it'll cause more trouble. It would give the protesters what they want to have them escorted out. You have a right to speak. You have a right to press, which is really to print, broadcast, distribute. You have a right to assemble. You have a right to petition. You have all of those rights. They do not include obstruction. They do not include taking over somebody else's office or taking over the floor of a government building. I think there should be a no-tolerance policy to it, just none, because lots of people feel like their voices are not heard. No matter which way any debate goes in the country, somebody will feel like they weren't listened to. What do they get to do in response?
Interesting, we didn't have this discussion when the Tea Party folks were shouting down members of Congress after the 2010 election all over the country, when people were talking about the Affordable Care Act, and there were Tea Party activists shouting people down, pushing people out of buildings. Nobody was complaining about it. We thought it was, oh my gosh, that looks like the country is uprising against President Barack Obama. Now we have members of Congress. 90% of the country wants background checks on guns. We can't even have a vote on it in the U.S. Congress. We can't even have a debate about it in the U.S. Congress. I don't condone what they did, but unnecessarily, but I understand the frustration. And to call them despicable, I think, is way over the line.
Well, I don't mind being way over the line on this, Chris, and I'll tell you why. All the examples that you gave were outside of the hall of the House. The House of Representatives is in a place for reasoned debate, not a place for people to act like children. It is a place where you address serious issues of the country. The rules of the House are to protect the minority. If you don't believe that, read Jefferson's manual. The manual says that you will not only adhere to the spirit of the law, but to the letter.
All right, this could go on for a long time and probably will, but we're going to have to take a break, and after we come back, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you. It's a fact, patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
North Carolina is a great state with great assets.
Among them are 180,000 state employees.
Our legislators are considering important decisions regarding working conditions,
health insurance,
retirement benefits,
and pay for state employees.
Scenic is the one voice at the table when those decisions are being considered.
Scenic is revitalized and refocused.
A stronger Scenic ensures a more effective voice.
Learn more at www.scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
All right, here we go. The best part of the show in many respects when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Howard Liam, we'll start with you.
Well, I hate being disappointed, and certainly even worse, I hate being embarrassed. Governor Easley asked me to set up the corporation that resulted in the formation of the New Schools Project. And I have watched that organization grow and had high hopes that it would be able to lead us in the direction of being able to educate kids at a much higher level. For that organization to fail with the amount of money that was poured into that organization and to be mismanaged at the level it is, to me, is totally unacceptable. And I just feel horrible that we have lost such a valuable asset in this state.
Okay. All right. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, I was astounded when the Division of Non-Public Education came out with its report for the most recently concluded school year. Homeschooling went up by more than 11,000 kids last year, 11% increase in the number of kids in home schools. Fascinating.
Interesting. Chris, tell us something we don't know.
We talked earlier on the show about redistricting and what was going to happen and whether or not the court would strike down legislative districts. I was told that not too long ago, Republicans were so convinced that the court was going to strike down the legislative districts, they were looking at new district maps. Some Democrats were calling people saying they're double bunking me in another district with another member. There were some African American members who thought they were being double bunked. So there was a real fear sweeping the building. I think some of it's still there, even though they've gone home, that the court is going to throw out these districts. So preparations have already been made.
Interesting. Tell us something we don't know, Joe.
I'm going to stay on the craft beer business and kind of reinforce what John Hood said earlier. The reason that the craft beer industry took off in North Carolina had almost nothing to do with politics except for one item, and that was they allowed a higher alcoholic content to be put in the beer, and the whole business just took off like a rocket.
I remember when Teresa Castrava was on our show, and she was lobbying for that pop the cap legislation. And I think you're right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll give you a full recap of legislative short session with more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.